Hi dear friend, today I want to talk with you about the technocracy, a very interesting spiritual movement who used a symbol you probably might have seen anyway, and a movement which you probably never heard about. So there we go. Before we start, I have to ask you a question. Did you ever hear about the word karma? This is a story about karma. And karma is, in essence, it is a wheel that you start bringing in motion, and it starts having all kind of wanted, unwanted consequences. But anyway, you bring your wheel of karma in motion, and then gradually things start having a life by their own. And before you know it, the whole world is enveloped in your karma.
You can imagine karma as a thing.
And for this, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. The story I'm going to tell you today about this technocracy movement is a story from a Daoist perspective. And I'm not going to fall back all the time to disclaim about this is from a Daoist perspective, but hey, my movement of my camera is happening by itself. That's interesting. That's a new thing. Anyway, this Daoist perspective is something that I think is interesting because it gives you a different angle on things. And that is also why I associate this story with karma. And you will see what I mean, because it is the story of a spiritual movement that nobody ever heard about, but in fact is permeating every aspect of our lives. More than I even anticipated when I started reading about it. The lecture today is actually based on a paper, a master thesis from a David Adair from the George Williams University in 1967. He is writing about the technocracy movement, which existed more or less in two stages from 1919 to 1967. At least that is the time when he stopped writing about it, because this is when his paper was being produced. But in effect, the karma of the movement starting in 1919 as what is called the Technical Alliance. We're going to talk about the causes of the movement, and we're going to talk about the results of this movement, and we're also going to talk about some of their ideas. And when I talk about the ideas of this movement, you will see, yeah, of course, this is really a thing. And we are so used to the concept of this movement nowadays that we can't even think about a life without it. And you will see it in many neo-spiritualist movements, which are some people call Hindu, some people call yogic, some people call Daoist, some people call scientism, some people call Christian. They're all originating to a large degree in these thoughts. And yes, it seems to be conflicting with some of the thoughts that I sometimes vent about particular concepts like energy and so on, as being originally from Christian source and so on and so on. But you see that the particular way of using the word of energy is originating in this technocracy movement. If you heard about it before, mention it down below. Let me hear about it, because I would like to hear your thoughts about this too. But let's get on with it. The first time when the Yin Yang symbol that everybody knows was being used was actually in a Roman villa in Egypt, or in Tunisia or something like this, and it was part of a decorative pattern which also is at the foundation of what we would call Islamic decorative arts later on. You know the stuff. The original Daoist symbol and the Confucian symbol for Yin Yang was something completely different, because it was associated with Wuji, and from there Yin and Yang come about and eventually turn into Taiji. The symbol of the Yin Yang as the two circles around, that is originating in the Song dynasty as part of Neo-Confucianism and Neo-Taoism. Very interesting though. not very relevant for this story.
Niels Bohr
Used the Yin Yang symbol as a symbol for his ideas about reality and his association with physics. There's a lot of discussion about the symbol in Western esoterics since that time, because of course the association with science is something that fascinates a lot of modern spiritual movements, and very often people are making claims that they do healings on the quantum level or at the quark level or at the quantum field level or anything like that, and as a result of that they claim control on a aspect of, well, scientifically researched, at least, maybe not proven always, level where the individual person is capable to do things that scientists only can do at CERN or with very expensive and great machineries. There was this conflict from the old time onwards between the Christian church and the modern new developing sciences and biology, and such as biology and physics and electricity theory and so on and so on. And gradually there was this intermingling taking place, especially from the spiritual corner, where, for instance, somebody like Mary Baker Eddy and also some other people from all kind of other movements, like Anton Mesmer, they started using these concepts of science to explain things which were seen as predominantly Christian or Catholic, or sometimes seen as superstitious in other cultures. These concepts and many other concepts, they had a reason where they came from, because of the way how science actually created a new image from reality. And this is where this technocracy movement comes in, because they had this idea that technology, when applied to engineer society, could lead to a better life for all people. One of their ideas was that you should create equality between people, so that there would not be space for privileged people. There would not be a dividing line between the rich and the poor, and there should be no lobbyism, because it invites favoritism, and as a result of the favoritism you would get this divide. And this is something that we see in this modern time. The paper that I talked about is actually describing only the influence of the technocracy movement in the United States and in Canada. And although, scientists very often, they seem to limit knowledge to a particular kind of cluster of reality, in which what they say might be true. In reality, these thoughts are not limited. This movement, actually, its thoughts are not limited only to Canada and the United States. And you see there's influence in Europe, there's influence in other parts of the world. And one of the major influences that I see, cannot prove at this point, is in China, because I think technocracy as a spiritual movement was part of a discourse that was going on at the beginning of the 20th century and influenced a lot of people, and the original socialism-like thoughts of the technocracy movement were also part of the discourse of how the communists in China, the Maoists in China, should reorganize their society. And they probably found some inspiration in thoughts of the technocracy movement or movements like that. We have to go to a few details to get actually at that point. We can see that the Chinese government actually is a sort of a bureaucratic, technocratic society. At least it's trying to become one. And as a result of that, it has this association with the technocracy movement. And we'll get to that. So, in the beginning, the technocracy movement started out as what is called the Technological Alliance. And they existed as a group between 1919 and 20, so it is a very short time actually. But that is the first stage, and they organized themselves, and then they became what is called Technocracy Inc. And they had followers. They were not a huge group. They were small enough to be forgotten after they fell apart. Although through this paper, people can still get to know about it. But their influence is actually pretty much major. And we're going to talk a little bit now about some of their ideas. For instance, you can say that they were like a millenarian movement or a messianic movement in a particular kind of way. And we have seen since the time many millenarian and messianic movements that had this idea that time follows a trajectory in a more or less linear fashion, where all of history is going towards a culmination point, and then everything explodes or everything changes or anything like that. And they saw their ideas as reflecting the idea that capitalism, not necessarily as a big evil or anything like that, but capitalism was going towards a crisis, which resembles also a little bit the words of Karl Marx. And it was going towards a crisis where through a collapse of the price system of capitalism, societies would fall apart. And as a result of this falling apart, they would gradually come to a period of turmoil, and as a result of this turmoil, then there should come a reorganization of society in which they, as a movement, wanted to play a role, and in fact they wanted to stimulate that to come about. This must be sounding familiar to you, because we have seen that the communists, the anarchists, the fascists, the socialists in general, but also the neo-Christians, the prepper movement, the Antifa, the squatter movement, the autonomous. There's so many movements who try to bring about social change and restlessness. It is amazing. We don't know what's happening on the dark web as part of setting up all kind of things. There's people who try to influence things in all kind of ways to upset society. We know that in the time of the technocracy movement there was this Great Depression happening, and there was at the same time the Spanish flu, and they were intertwined with each other, and it led to the Second World War and unemployment and so on and so on. And in this atmosphere where there was no hope, there was a huge unemployment all over the world, there was this idea that technocracy could help society to order society as a whole. And then we come from there to the other thing. Because first, let me finish this idea about this millenarianism, is that they had this idea that probably society would collapse, and then there would be probably a period of fascism coming. And this period of fascism would then be replaced gradually by technocratic governance, merit-based, through which a better world could come about, and people would live in a world which is more, where everybody is more equal. And in a way, it also resembles the works of Aldous Huxley, The Brave New World. I don't know if you ever read that book, but it's definitely worth the trouble, where there was this equality-based society that was slightly, well, pretty much hedonistic, and eventually it collapsed. No, it was actually based on the collapse of capitalism, and from there a technocratic society was being created in which they were living. The story ended not very well for that system, because people were longing back to the ideal American system. So they liberated themselves from, well, okay, that's another story, of course. But this linear thing is something that you can see coming back in a lot of different kind of things. There is this idea from the transhumanists that technology is coming together to a singularity point, where eventually the technological development is going so fast that as a human beings we can only try to hop along and try to merge with this technology to keep up with it. And we are already completely surrounded by technology. We already cannot live without it. This movie cannot be made without technology, which in the past was enough to make a spaceship go to the moon, and I have this all in my phone. There's people who cannot live without technology because, you know, they cannot look at anything anymore without glasses. This is not a new technology, it's an old technology already. Technology makes our teapots and our teacups, and it actually grows our tea and it picks our tea, and it also creates pens. Actually, I had it in the right order also, look at that. When you see this presence of that, we are already living in a sort of technology-driven world, of course. And this is what their ideal was, to live in a world that is technology-driven. And as a result of this technology-driven thing, they had this idea that science should be used to apply to society, and then they would apply it in the form of social engineering. And social engineering, as a word, as a concept, it should scare you a little bit. But of course, every politician is involved in social engineering. Every political party, every industry is involved in social engineering. You had these very famous movements like eugenetics, which comes from the United States and was absorbed in the fascist movement of the Nazis, and they wanted to create better people. And you see it nowadays coming back in the ideologies that you see growing around this CRISPR technology, where you can improve the quality of your children by, you know, changing some of the genes in your sperms or ovaries, through which your legs maybe get your children maybe get better legs, or are not colorblind, or maybe have a bigger nose or heavier eyebrows, or whatever you want, maybe wings. Everything is possible in a society where people become crazy as a result of their wealth. Very anti-Daoist, actually, because not natural, right? Artificial. And we already know that from cloning and other techniques that the risk of these kind of eugenetic programs can be that down the line of evolution, some problems come about because, you know, we don't understand really the 30-something million genes that we have. We only understand like a tiny fraction of it. So manipulating them maybe not such a very good idea. But this social engineering that I had as an idea, we see actually happening at a large scale. I mean, look at this. This movie goes to YouTube and goes to Patreon. These kind of platforms, social media like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, what's it called? All the other things like discourse and I should make a list actually of all these things. But there are so many platforms that all try to have an influence on reality. These are already busy with social engineering because they try to get their message through about democracy, or about freedom of speech, or about freedom of expression, or any kind of thing like that. And this is only in the West, and then in the East they have their own variation of it, of being able to express yourself in the way how the great god, what's his name? Look at all the water.
Ik heb heel erg dorst.
Look at all the water.
Maar die kan ik toch niet drinken?
This is another one. This is another one. You also do another one then. Yeah.
How long do I stand here?